Hello everybody. Let me know if we have issues with audio or video. My audio might be a little bit low, but it says that I'm good. I had to reinstall Windows in my computer, so hopefully all of our settings are good and we will have a nice easy live stream. I will talk about what today's video is going to be while we wait for some folks to join us here, and then we'll cover our stuff. So what this live stream is, and what most of these live streams are, at least in the last 6 months or so, we every week or so I post up a video on a different lab scope testing method, typically on a Sunday or a Monday depending on how busy I am, and then I normally give you guys the week to submit a waveform, try out the test, take a picture of your capture, submit it on Facebook. We've also added an email where you guys can email your results in, or use a Google form, which I hope is working. Almost everyone that's participating does so via Facebook, but I provide the alternative methods in case you're anti-Facebook. I understand. So today's video is going to be kind of a recap of the captures that were posted for week 19, which was throttle position sensors. So I showed you guys kind of how the throttle position sensor works and performed the test on a vehicle. On that one, which vehicle did I might have used my 4Runner. I can't even remember. That was 2 weeks ago. And we have quite a few waveforms posted up. We have one that was kind of a strange one. We had trouble getting a good waveform, and I want to talk about that one when we get to it. And I was hoping to find a test vehicle that was the same kind of vintage vehicle or same system, so I could find out why the test results that someone was getting were not 100% what we're used to seeing. But I haven't found a 2017 or newer Chevy Tahoe. I looked in my customer database. I only had one customer with one of those vehicles, and no, I did not just wake up. I've been outside working most of the day. So we'll talk about that one when we get to it. So I'll pull up the Facebook submissions and we'll go through them. Let me scroll down here so I can start from when I first posted the video, and we'll go through them. Let's see. Sorry, give me 1 second. Okay, here we go. Threw me off guard because Angel had posted one for week 18. But let me flip over to here. Can everybody see that okay? I might need to adjust some things here since I reinstalled my computer. Not all of my settings are 100%. And I will open these to where they're a little bit bigger. So Angel had posted week 18 on a Chevy Tahoe hybrid. Actually, I think we talked about that one. Yeah, there must have been a comment on it, which brought it back up to the top. Because I had commented that I hadn't seen any Chevy Tahoe or Suburban hybrids come into the shop. Okay. Now, this wasn't week 19, but it was posted since then. This is a cam and crank sensor. Abdullah posted this up. Not sure what scope he's using, the Autel Maxiscope, and cam and crank. Now, my only concern with, now I'm not familiar with the Autel scope a whole lot, but my only concern with this image is we have kind of the same ripple happening on our crank sensor waveform that's being influenced from our cam sensor waveform being influenced from our crank sensor. So we might have a possible bad ground on the scope that's causing that weird ripple there. I don't know if I commented on the actual post or not, but typically when I see that waveform overriding the other waveform, it's because there's a bad ground on the scope. It says known good for a 1TR FE. I'm not sure which engine that is. I'm not quite familiar with all of the newer engines. Hey Chris, how's it going? Doug Wilson posted his first two week 19 First two are week 19 TPS. And then the next two is the bad starter, which is the reason it was in the shop. And on that one, he has green as a starter current, yellow and red are battery voltage at the battery and the starter. Blue is the block ground. So we'll start out with his week 19 post, which is a TPS. So here he's just, actuating that throttle. This probably still has a cable TPS. So he just gets in and presses that pedal down to the floor to maximum. We don't see any glitches. He's using the ATS scope, which has a pretty good record or buffer. So you can zoom in quite a bit and analyze this waveform afterwards. Here's one that's zoomed in a little bit more. So these aren't glitches, these little stair steps. That's just fluctuations in our foot as we're depressing the pedal, or if he was doing it by hand. It's really hard to get a nice smooth motion. So that is normal. If we know that we're moving it and we see a spot where it hangs at a certain voltage, then that could be a bad spot. But typically we're going to see a spike that drops down or drops up or jumps up rapidly as we're going through that range. And then, anything anomaly like that pops out of there is typically a glitch or bad spot in that TPS sensor on that resistor that the contact is wiping against. So here was, I believe green was the amp clamp on the starter cable current. So this is pretty noisy. A lot of stuff going on here. We have a little bit of noise on the grounds here. His powers, we're not zoomed in enough here, but he's probably sitting around 12 volts. Might be a little bit lower than that. But a lot of noise in our current waveform. And then I don't know if this one is the after. Maybe this was cranking it after replacing the starter. Let me go again here. No, that must be the after picture. So each one of those humps is the engine cranking over, like a relative compression check, I suppose. But I don't see the big spike as it kicks in, unless we're like really zoomed in here. Doug, I didn't see you in the chat yet, but if you're in the chat, then you can elaborate a little bit more. I'll close this so we can read your notes here. Green is starter current, and the other one's at battery voltage. So that must be what it is. But this one's super noisy. Let's jump up to another one. Okay, so those were both from the old starter. Here we go. Here is the new starter. And I forgot there was a group discussion about this TPS sensor. Let me open this up. We can see that our lowest spot here is at 3 volts, and I didn't catch it because I'm not used to using the ATS scope. I'm not used to everything sharing this scale over here. I'm used to having multiple scales for my different channels. But this green channel sitting at 3 volts instead of 0 or half a volt, and then it goes all the way up to 6.5 volts, which doesn't make sense because we have a 5 volt reference and a 0 volt reference. So if you remember, this 0 is connected to one side of that resistive strip. This 5 volts is on the other side, and as that contact goes across, it sweeps between the 0 and the 5 volts, but realistically we're only going to be like half a volt up to 4.5 volts. So I missed that, and they had a discussion about it. What ended up happening is he had an amp clamp connected to the ATS scope, and he had zeroed it for the amp clamp, which caused that offset when he switched back to voltage. So here he redid it. So when we're not pressing the pedal, we're sitting around 1 volt. Full throttle is about 4.5, which is pretty typical. Fords don't drop down to that 0.5 range. They're normally a little bit higher, around 0.8. And then here was the new starter. We see that inrush current as it's taking that energy to try and get the engine started, or to start the momentum of turning it over. And then we see each one of these humps is a cylinder on compression. And then around this point, it probably started up or was spinning fast enough that we don't see the humps anymore. So thanks for sharing that second picture with the correct waveform, Doug. I know that you had to go back on that car and redo your settings to get it, but I appreciate it. And Angel has a week 19, 2014 Ford F-250 with a 6.2 known good. And this is I I assume a drive-by-wire system. It has 2 throttle position sensors, and they are going to display inversely of each other. So one's going to start at 0.5 volt, the other one's going to start at 4.5, and as they go along, they're going to crisscross and then kind of opposite of each other. So when you floor it, the one that starts at 0.5 volt is going to jump up to 4.5, which we can see happens here. And then when you let back off, it's going to drop down. So as long as you kind of see them inversing and they look kind of the same, then you're going to be good. One way to verify it is you can invert the either channel, it doesn't matter which, and then the waveforms are going to match up. And that's going to show you if you have, yeah, you got here just in time for me to cover yours. So yeah, if you invert one of them, then you can see if there's any deviation between the two, because that's when the computer is going to set a TPS 1/2 correlation code. If it says, hey, my TPS number 1 doesn't match my TPS number 2 within a certain parameter, it's normally not more than like 1 or 2%. If they go away from each other at some point, it's going to set a fault code and the check engine light's going to come on. So sometimes I'll capture it like this just to see, and if I see something, a suspect area, then I'll invert it and make sure that they match. Race car. I'm pretty sure that's like a 2010 Honda Civic with like 14-inch wheels with hubcaps on them and a bunch of chrome things added onto the car. I've seen him driving around town. He's not going fast, just to let you know. It sounded fast, not fast. But he even has this one labeled here. TPS number 1 is our blue. TPS number 2 is the red channel, with the color code and what pin he put it in. Angel, you put a lot more work into your waveforms than I do. I oftentimes forget to save my waveforms after I captured them, let alone label them. But for saving known goods for future reference, it's always a good idea to label them. I don't think there was any other pictures in here. We just had a discussion about broken valve springs on those Ford 6.2s. Lawnmower on the loose. We had a kid out here. I mean, there's a highway like right behind my house. There was a kid out here on a little moped that sounded like it had an old like hit and miss tractor motor. It was super loud. I did not expect it to be a moped, but he drove by like 3 or 4 times. He probably saw me outside working and wanted to show off his rig. Luke Johnson posted a 2012 Silverado 5.3 throttle sweep. Then he has a slow sweep and several snap throttles. So I like the slow sweep. The snap throttle, if you have the resolution to zoom in, or if you're using the snap-on and you started out zoomed in, then that's great. Sometimes if you're snapping the throttle, then you lose some of that information. Now, there's a weird kind of hiccup right here, but it happens on the high and the low TPS, and they mimic each other. So that's probably normal. And these ones, just like the Ford, are going to invert from each other. And I'm hoping we get to the one that runs like a half voltage waveform. I can't remember what vehicles do that off the top of my head. And I think I scoped a 2005 Chevy, and they both had matching waveforms, except for the one had the little dropouts that I mentioned in our first video. So another one, we're inverting, and then sometimes in the snap throttle is where you find a glitch. That fast movement causes that contact to kind of hop off of the contact strip. So if that's where you think you're having the issue, then you can snap it a few times and zoom in, or record at a higher sample rate. You just have to make sure to hit the stop button before your buffer time runs out and that waveform disappears. Thanks for sharing that one, Luke. Osmond shared one. This was like alternator ripple. I have a hard time with the videos. I guess I don't have the focus to watch it. I like the snapshots. But he was checking some alternator ripple on his on some vehicle. I can't remember what it was. So he has 2 videos, and then he changed the scaling. But I like pictures, still images. Makes it a little bit easier for me to see. Marvin shared one. Can't remember which week this was for the cam and crank, but 07 F-150 cam and crank. I'm sure if it's good. I don't know if he's asking if he's not sure if it's good or if it is good. And depending on I guess a 4.6 is going to have just the one cam sensor. So I'm not sure if that one's good or not. I'd have to reference some known good waveforms. But the signals look good. You know, I don't see any major issues here. And I can't remember on the Fords if this is inverted or not, because both of these sensors are variable reluctance sensors. They're an AC sensor, so there's two different wires. You can normally get a signal on either wire, but sometimes it's inverted. So it's not a big deal. You just have to watch that if you're comparing yours to a known good waveform. Abdullah has another one here. 1.6 liter Hyundai Elantra from 2010. Cam and crank sensor with an ignition and injection pulse. So covering several weeks all at one time. We have the ignition event here, injection pulse, cam and crank. This is a really good way to capture your known good waveforms for cam sensor, crank sensor. If you have the extra channels, grab like an ignition sync so people can see where number one firing lines up with. I do like when I see that online. I rarely capture myself that way because it's an extra wire for me to hook up. Paul Smith has one week 19 homework on the wife's 2007 Honda Odyssey, and he used the extra two channels to monitor the voltage going to the throttle body, because we've only talked about the TPS so far, but on the newer vehicles that are drive-by-wire, they have the electric motor mounted on there to control the throttle blade opening and closing, and we're going to see some strange waveforms on that you're probably not used to. We are going to cover those in the future, so I'll point them out here, but we'll go into detail on another video. So this one has matching TPS sensors. You can see the arc here. They both kind of match. He has a measurement for high and low. So one started out at, they don't start out at the same voltage. Strange. They end at almost the same voltage, but one starts out at 0.9, one starts out at 1.7. But they both end up around, 4.2 volts. Huh. So that's our two TPS sensors. So that one's a little trickier to find out if the correlation is correct. The waveforms match. We don't see any obvious glitches, but unless you had a known good waveform to match it up against, you may think that you have a problem, and it may be perfectly normal. If this came in with the throttle body code and I scoped it, I'd be like, okay, well, TPS, whichever one this is, yellow channel is, he doesn't say if it's 1 or 2, but I would assume that one was wrong because it has a higher starting voltage. So our throttle bodies, if we disconnect the motor, I'll talk about the motor real quick here. We have our blue channel and green channel is motor, I would say power and ground, but it would be motor pin 1 and 2. Because if we unhook that motor, those two wires on the motor, it'll probably have a fast idle. It'll probably idle around 1200 RPM or 1000 RPM. Most vehicles do that as a limp-in mode. So if they have an issue with the throttle body, the vehicle's not going to stall. And then if you fire up the vehicle and it's running, and the vehicle's like, okay, we need to drop down from 1000 RPM to 600, it actually runs that motor backwards and closes the throttle body a little bit. And then when you snap it, it releases it and runs power the other way to open it up. And it does that by pulsing the wires. That's why this one's a really, really thick line. If we zoomed in, it would be a square wave. And the more power you give it, the more we have on time instead of off time. And then here on the other channel, this is probably, you can see it in the TPS, where he released full throttle and started closing it. So now it starts, pulsing it the other direction. We release the power a little bit and we pulse the ground. So it inverts that power to help close that throttle body. Let's see, was that the only one there? So thanks for sharing that, Paul. You always go a little extra and get them extra channels used up. May as well use them if we have them. Here's the other one that Luke Johnson posted. This was a 2017 Yukon with a 5.3. So At first, many of us thought it was just a connection issue or a scope issue or a sampling rate issue with this waveform, because this was the signal that Luke got. And it's very similar to that signal that Paul got, where it was bouncing between, 0 volts, and this was only between 4.5 volts. So it's not full battery power. But this was the waveform that he got on his TPS signal. Zoomed in, it looks kind of ugly, but several people noticed that the sample rate was a little bit low. So it's hard to tell if this is accurate or not, or if we're getting some aliasing. The sample rate's not high enough to obtain a clean picture. And then I'm going to scroll down in the comments because we have some more captures. Let me see here. So this is a different vehicle. Luke tested another Yukon XL 2016, performed the same test with a different scope, and got this waveform. So we see kind of a repetitive pattern here. Some noise, a blank, some noise, a blank. Now, I don't know if this sample rate is good for the Autel, but maybe this TPS has active electronics in it, and it's sending out a digital signal. Now, if I go into the Snap-on guided component test, it doesn't tell me that. It says that this operates just like a normal TPS, and I should have 0 to 5 volts on a sweep. But that's not what we're seeing, and Luke tested 2 different vehicles. So I am going to try and find one of those vehicles and see if I can test it, see if I get the same results or what's going on. And then, just to make sure, he has a test with the motor control. So this one was going all the way up to 12 volts and then down to 0 volts. So he definitely was testing the right wires. It's just a different signal than we're used to seeing. So I'm going to try and find, at least I know it's a 16 and up. I just looked at my database for 17 and 18. I didn't want to go too new because they could have changed it again. But all my customers with 17s and 18s for Yukon Silverados. My database was kind of limited. A lot of those vehicles are still going back to the dealership. And then Richard Cook has one, week 19, throttle position sensor on a 93 Acura Integra, known good, and he captured it with his Picoscope 7 and the Modus Ultra. So if you have multiple scopes, it's a good idea to bounce back and forth between them, especially if you're getting a weird waveform. Grab another scope if you have one handy, just to make sure that it's not a scope issue. But to stay fluent with them, use both of them sporadically. Don't get hooked on just one. So going wide open, hanging open, coming back down. We don't see any major glitches. And it looks like we have a 5 volt reference and a ground. So probably a 3-wire TPS on that one. And then we have the Modus. And we only captured the 1 channel. Modus is only a 2-channel scope anyways. But we see the same waveform here. And everything looks pretty good. No major glitches. There is a little bit of noise in here. But if we look where we're not activating the throttle, there's noise present on the line anyways. And then separate capture, because we only have 2 channels for the reference voltage and the ground. If you have issues with your TPS signal wire, it's always a good idea to go back and check the reference and the ground. Because if you have a problem with either one of those, then that's what's going to skew your reading up or down. And I think that was it. I'm going to go ahead and refresh this. Make sure that nobody posted anything since we started. We do, but it's it's not a TPS waveform. Let's see. Nissan with a rough idle. Looks like ignition. Number 3 is known good coil pack. Strange secondary waveform on the number 3 old coil pack. 4-cylinder 1, 2, and 4. Voltage pulses over the other coils at the ground when I back probe. So one, and I'm not sure on this system if it's a double spike or double strike system or not. This waveform is inverted. So we have what to me looks like a lean condition, but it's hard to tell with our time base. I would typically zoom in a little bit more if I'm looking at ignition waveforms. It's hard to tell what's happening when you're zoomed out, but this could be a multi-strike ignition system. See that one fired. Or it's possible that those other waveforms just ran out of energy. I would recapture this at a higher sample rate or zoom in some more. It looks like you're using the U scope, so there is a little bit of zoom in and out after you capture it, but it's kind of limited. You'll probably want to change your time base and capture again. Oh, and now we have current on this one. So yeah, this thing's all over the place. If this has 4 different coils in it, then they're probably all bad. I would get a whole brand new set, maybe from the dealer if you can, or from a reputable aftermarket source. This one here looks the best out of all of them, but I'm not quite sure because it doesn't ever flatten out. It doesn't ever saturate the coil with energy. This one here looks shorted to me. We don't see that curve. It goes straight up. And then once the driver in the PCM says, hey, we got a problem, it current limits it. This one here looks fairly normal, but I can't tell. So is this not the U scope? Unless this is a reference channel. It just looks like the U scope. This one here could be fairly normal, but at the same time, since all of them look different, I would try to get a matching set of coils from whatever brand you're using. If you have Denzos available where you're located and they make them for that car, that's probably what I would run, because they're probably a Denso or like a Mitsubishi brand coil from the factory. I don't know if Bosch makes anything for, was this a Suzuki? Nissan. It's probably a Denso, but that doesn't look good. I would just change all 4 of them with good coils, and that way you know you have a match set in there, and then you can looks like a hand tech, and that could be. I'm not familiar with all of the different ones out there. And then I was hoping we had an after waveform. Okay, amps on the ground. Okay, I think that this ground, we're measuring voltage, and we're getting a voltage kick on the ground wire whenever that coil charges up. So the voltage drop is higher on this cylinder and this cylinder. If I'm reading this correctly, we could have bad grounds going to those coils. And I don't know if these coils are a 3-wire coil. I don't have all the information. There's not a wiring diagram posted with this coil or a picture of the coil. But we may have a bad ground. Whether that ground is through the computer or a bolt on the intake, there may be some corrosion in the harness, because it seems pretty repetitive on this pattern of what we're seeing. So if they're all connected to the same ground source, I wouldn't think that is just our issue. And I really don't know how much voltage drop we're seeing here. This could only be like 1/10 of a volt, and it may not be anything major, but I would put 4 good coils in it, verify that your grounds are good, and you're probably good to go. If you have mismatched coils in there now, you could, or you take your coils, you can mix them around. Just keep them labeled where they were and see if the pattern follows the coils. If it doesn't follow the coils, then it's in the wiring. That's all I got. Oh, if I go further, we have the coil picture. 3-wire coil. Okay. So they all ground at the same location, but they're all spliced together. Since the voltage drop looks different on the waveforms, I would say that wherever these wires splice together is probably where there's some corrosion, since we're seeing different levels of voltage drop. That's what I would check. The other thing you could do is add a temporary ground to all 4 coils and see if the problem goes away. So kind of a good case study, although I would zoom in on these images a little bit just so we have a clearer waveform. And then let me, I'll double check my email, make sure that nobody has submitted anything since we've started here. If I can find it. For some reason I closed it. Nothing there. And I'll double check to make sure nobody submitted anything via my Google form. And we'll wrap this one up. I have not filmed tomorrow's video yet. I was outside doing yard work all day. But I think what I'm going to do is we'll cover the electronic throttle body motor control. And I'm going to have to look. I can't remember if it's Toyota. There's some vehicles out there that use a motor brake as well. So they'll run the throttle to a certain position. And if you're just cruising, they have like a magnetic brake that locks it, I think. I've never really had an issue with them. So I've never waited or never scoped them to see if I actually had an issue or not. But if that is a system that has it, I think it is. But if the Toyota's the one that has it, then I will grab my dad's Tundra, because that's the throttle body that I'm thinking of in my head, and I'll see if it has the motor brake in it. Beyond that, I have a check engine light on my van. I just bought a new van. It's a 2004 Chevy Express van, and it has a check engine light for both rear O2 sensors. The left bank, the wires were rubbed through on the drive shaft. I just repaired them temporarily. I have O2 sensors for it because I know the one had a damaged harness. It set the code for the other one after about 100 miles of driving. And it's for the heater circuit on both of them. So either they both have bad heater circuits or I have a power issue going to it. So I'll probably do the throttle body for tomorrow, the motor control. And then I'll do O2 sensors, and we'll look at narrowband O2 sensors, just traditional. Because air-fuel ratio sensors I don't know enough about to scope them. And there's not a whole lot of good information you can get from scoping them, other than the heater circuit. The rest of it is best just to let the computer in the car calculate what's going on and verify it with a 5-gas analyzer. But we will, on the narrowband O2 sensors, we'll talk about the signal that we're supposed to get on the signal wire, and then we'll look at our heater circuit as well. And Chevys are kind of common for heater circuit codes. Toyotas are common for heater circuit codes. And then, I'll scope them. I'll put the new ones in because I know it needs at least one. I always like to do them as a pair, whether it's upstream or downstream. So then we'll scope it again afterwards. So tomorrow's video should be throttle body motor control. And then the next video after that should be O2 sensors. We may stick to the 2-week schedule depending on how many uploads I get. Just because if I do it after 1 week and there's only 3 submitted waveforms, then we're not going to have a whole lot to talk about. Plus, I'm a little too busy right now to get a video produced every single week, so it gives me a little bit of time to get a few things going as well. Because I'm also trying to work on my Mercedes bus, which I haven't worked on it this week because it's been raining, and I don't have a garage at home, and I don't have space at the shop to store the van when I'm not working on it. So for now, I just work on when there's good weather and I have some time. I appreciate you guys coming out and submitting some waveforms, watching the live stream. I don't see any other submitted waveforms. I hope you guys are having a wonderful weekend. Stay safe out there. Have a good, productive, easy week next week. And I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.